Welcome to my sci-fi stories. If you love thrilling sci-fi tales, subscribe now and hit the bell so you never miss an adventure. Let's get into it. The moonlight shone pale and cold over the battlefield, illuminating the grim faces of the Velmaran defenders standing atop the walls of Fort Iridan. The fortress, which once symbolized their greatest victory, now stood as their last hope of survival. Beyond the walls, the Black Order loomed, their ranks stretching across the horizon like a tide of darkness. They did not chant battle cries. They did not roar in fury. They simply marched, silent and inevitable. At their head, High Inquisitor Malakar stood motionless, his golden eyes gleaming beneath his silver mask. At his side, the Five Dreadlords stood like living nightmares. Vashal, the phantom blade, his swords flickering in and out of existence, waiting for the moment to strike. Iskara, the Bone Witch, her skeletal fingers twisting in the air, raising the dead with each motion. Kalar, the Storm Tyrant, his staff crackling with lightning, the sky above shifting with his will. Zephon, the Voidwalker, unseen, but his presence thickened the shadows. Morvail, the Iron Juggernaut, his massive plated armor reflecting the torchlight of the fortress, his gauntleted fists flexing in anticipation. They were monsters, not men, and they had come to end Velmara. Inside the fortress war room, the air was thick with tension. King Alden stood over the war table, flanked by Marcus Cruz, Mike Morgan, Ryan Cook, Alara, and the senior Velmaran commanders. Ryan placed a hand on the table, his mind racing. We can't fight them head on. We saw what they did back there. They cut through our Magitech armor like it was nothing. Mike crossed his arms. Then we change how we fight. Fort Iridan isn't just some outpost, it's a fortress. We make them bleed for every step they take. Marcus exhaled, his mind calculating their last hope. We won't win by brute force. We win by outlasting them. The plan was simple in concept, but desperate in execution. The outer wall. The Killzone artillery cannons would fire at long range, using explosive Magitech rounds to soften enemy formations. Magitech traps, runes embedded in the walls and ground, would create magical landmines. Ballistae and energy-infused arrows would rain down on the enemy forces. The inner wall, the bloody grind. Once the gates were breached, the Velmaran infantry would lure the enemy into narrow corridors, forcing them into bottlenecks. Battle mages would focus on barriers and counter magic to disrupt enemy spells. Close quarters specialists, including Mike's strike team, would engage in guerrilla-style skirmishes. The final keep, the last stand. If all else failed, the remaining defenders would fall back to the inner keep. Ryan and Kevin Scott would focus on deploying an experimental anti-Dreadlord Magitech weapon. Marcus would lead the last line of defense personally. King Alden looked at them all. This fortress has stood for generations. I will not be the king who lets it fall. Marcus met his gaze, nodding. Then let's make them remember this night. As the Black Order reached the walls, the air seemed to crackle with their presence. Then, Malakar raised his hand. Burn it down! Dreadlord Kalar stepped forward, his staff pulsating with lightning. A storm of arcane energy erupted from the sky, striking the fortress ramparts in a deafening explosion. Stone and debris rained down, sending Velmaran soldiers plummeting from the walls. Fire! Marcus roared. The Thunderstrike cannons unleashed their payloads, sending blue-hot projectiles crashing into the Black Order's front lines. The initial impact was devastating. Entire squads of Samara warriors were incinerated on the spot. For the first time, the enemy hesitated, but only for a moment. Then, Dreadlord Morvail stepped forward. The massive ironclad behemoth marched into the fire unscathed. Marcus felt a chill. Nothing stopping that bastard. Morvail raised his massive fist and slammed it into the gates. The first punch cracked the enchanted steel. The second caved it inward. The third sent the gates flying off their hinges. The Black Order surged inside. Inside the fortress, the Velmaran forces fought with desperation. Magitech turrets fired in short bursts, cutting down enemies. Battle mages clashed with Solmara's warlocks, their spells colliding in midair. Mike's strike team engaged in brutal hand-to-hand combat, dodging Voidwalker assassins and countering with Magitech-infused blades. Marcus saw Dreadlord Vashal cutting through Velmaran knights with impossible speed. He raised his rifle and fired. The phantom blade vanished. A moment later, Marcus felt a blade at his throat. Predictable, Vashal whispered. But before he could strike, a sudden blast of energy hit him from the side. Ryan, from the balcony above, had fired an experimental Magitech pulse rifle. The force sent Vashal hurtling into a nearby pillar. Ryan grinned. "Not so fast, asshole." But before they could capitalize, the Bone Witch entered the fray. Iskara whispered to the corpses littering the ground, and suddenly, the dead began to rise. Velmaran soldiers turned on their own men, their bodies moving against their will. A Velmaran captain stabbed his own ally, his eyes hollow and lifeless. Marcus gritted his teeth. "Damn it! We have to fall back." The Velmaran defenders were pushed back, forced to retreat into the inner keep. Behind them, Malakar entered the courtyard, his blade gleaming. "There is no escape," he declared. Marcus stood at the doorway, blood dripping from a wound on his arm, his breathing ragged. He locked eyes with Malakar. "Then come and take it." Malakar raised his blade. The final battle for Fort Iridan had begun. The inner keep of Fort Iridan trembled as the first wave of the Black Order smashed through the gates. The once proud stronghold, which had held against the might of Solmara's armies, was now on the brink of collapse. The Velmaran defenders fought desperately, their Magitech weapons blazing, clashing against the nightmarish warriors of the Black Order. Magic and technology collided in brilliant flashes, but the enemy was unlike anything they had ever faced. And at the center of it all, High Inquisitor Malakar stepped forward. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if the battle raging around him was nothing more than an afterthought. His golden eyes burned beneath his silver mask, locking onto one target: Marcus Cruz. The moment Marcus saw Malakar enter the keep, he knew there was no running. The battle around them seemed to fade into the background, as if the world itself had acknowledged what was about to happen. This was not just a fight. It was a battle of two warriors from different worlds, two ideologies, two forces colliding. The man who had brought Magitech warfare to Etheris, and the man who embodied the absolute rule of Solmara. Malakar stopped a few feet away from Marcus, his crimson cape billowing behind him. "This is not their fight," Malakar said, his voice calm but absolute. With a single motion, he raised his hand, and the entire Black Order halted. The battlefield grew silent. Mike, Ryan, King Alden, and the remaining Velmaran soldiers watched, frozen, waiting. Marcus wiped blood from his lip, keeping his Magitech rifle aimed at Malakar's chest. "You want me?" Marcus said, voice low. "Then come and get me." Malakar reached for his weapon, a great sword unlike any other, its blade etched with runes of dark energy, its core pulsating like a living thing. "I accept." Then, he vanished. Marcus barely had time to react. One moment, Malakar was several feet away. The next, he was directly in front of him, his blade already mid-swing. Marcus threw himself to the side. The greatsword sliced through the air with a roar, cutting deep into the stone wall where Marcus had just been standing. "He's faster than I expected." Marcus hit the ground and rolled, snapping his rifle up and firing a burst of 3 high-energy plasma rounds. Malakar's sword flickered through the air, deflecting the first 2 shots effortlessly. The third shot, however, hit him square in the shoulder. For a brief moment, Marcus felt a surge of triumph, but then he saw the result. The plasma round had barely scorched Malakar's armor. The High Inquisitor turned his head slightly, studying the impact mark. Then he smiled. Interesting. Marcus had no time to think before Malakar attacked again. The greatsword moved like a blur, its enchanted runes flaring as it came down toward Marcus's head. Marcus barely raised his energy blade in time, the force of the impact sending shockwaves through his arms. The 2 warriors pushed against each other, sparks flying where their weapons met. Marcus grit his teeth. "You talk too much." He twisted his body, using Malakar's momentum against him, and delivered a brutal sidekick to the Inquisitor's ribs. The impact forced Malakar back a step. Marcus didn't hesitate. He fired his grappling line, launching himself upward toward the ruined battlements. He landed on a crumbling ledge, aiming his rifle. "Let's see how you handle this." He fired an explosive round directly at Malakar's feet. The blast engulfed the area in flames, chunks of stone raining down from the shattered walls. Smoke and fire obscured Marcus's vision. Was it enough? As the flames died down, a figure emerged from the smoke, untouched, unharmed. Malakar raised his hand, and the flames vanished. His golden eyes glowed brighter. "You fight well, but you rely too much on tricks." Marcus felt a sudden weight in his chest, a presence pressing down on him, suffocating. Then Malakar raised his other hand, and Marcus's body was lifted into the air. Malakar's grip on reality itself seemed absolute. Marcus struggled, his hands clawing at his throat, but there was no hand around his neck. No chains, just pure force. His lungs screamed for air. "This is the difference between us," Malakar said softly. "You are a soldier. I am something far greater." Marcus felt his vision darken. Not yet. His hand twitched toward his belt. A single Magitech pulse grenade. He pressed the trigger. The blast erupted directly between them, sending both warriors flying. Marcus slammed into a pillar, the impact jarring every bone in his body. Malakar was forced back. His silver mask cracked slightly from the explosion. For the first time, Malakar did not immediately attack. He touched the crack in his mask. Then he laughed. "You truly are fascinating, Captain Cruz." Marcus coughed, forcing himself to his feet. His energy blade flickered in his grip. "Glad you're entertained." Then, a blast of Magitech energy slammed into Malakar's chest. At the entrance of the keep, Ryan Cook stood, a massive energy cannon mounted on his shoulder. Mike stood beside him, rifle raised. Ryan grinned. "Hey, asshole." Malakar's eyes narrowed. Ryan fired again. The experimental Magitech cannon unleashed another devastating blast, striking Malakar dead center. This time, the force of the attack sent him flying through a stone wall. The battlefield froze. For the first time, the Black Order hesitated. Then, the Dreadlords moved. Vashel blurred forward, swords flashing. Iskara raised her arms, summoning undead reinforcements. Xiphon vanished into the shadows, reappearing behind Ryan. The battle had shifted. Marcus, barely standing, grabbed his rifle. "We're not done yet." King Alden raised his sword. "To arms! Hold the keep!" The final phase of the siege had begun. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, hit the like button, share with fellow sci-fi fans, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of the journey. Stay tuned for more adventures. Here is another video I know you will enjoy.